Hi, my friends. Today I want to present you a new story. Enjoy watching it.
It all began on a gray November morning, the kind where the sun seemed to have forgotten to rise. Dorothy Bootman, a 29-year-old single mother of two, was preparing breakfast in their modest two-bedroom apartment. The boys, Evan and Brendan, sat at the worn kitchen table, arguing over who would get the last piece of toast. "Mom," Brendan whined, "Evan always takes the bigger half." "Do I look like a referee?" Dorothy replied with a tired smile, splitting the toast evenly and placing it between them. "There, problem solved." She turned to the sink, her hands trembling as she scrubbed a plate. The weight of her financial troubles hung heavily over her, though she tried to mask it. Her husband, Jacob, had left them 6 months ago, vanishing into thin air after convincing her to sign what he called routine papers. Those papers turned out to be the documents that stripped her of their house, savings, and even her car. He had taken everything. Her phone buzzed on the counter, breaking her thoughts. It was a message from her landlord. Rent overdue. Pay by Friday or face eviction. Her chest tightened. She glanced at her boys, who were now laughing over a silly joke Brendan had made. They had no idea how close they were to losing the little stability they had left. At 9 a.m., Dorothy grabbed her coat and kissed her sons goodbye. "Be good for Mrs. Harper," she said, referring to the elderly neighbor who watched them while Dorothy worked. Her job at the hospital as a cleaner was grueling but necessary. By lunchtime, her back ached from scrubbing floors and her hands were red and raw. As she pushed her cart down the hallway, she overheard two nurses talking. "Did you hear about the Johnson Wing expansion? They're hiring new staff soon." Dorothy paused, her heart skipping a beat. A better paying job? It was a slim chance, but any chance was better than none. She made a mental note to look into it later. When she returned home that evening, Dorothy found a letter taped to her door. It was an eviction notice. Her knees buckled as she leaned against the wall, clutching the paper. The boys ran to her, their faces filled with concern. "Mom, are you okay?" Evan asked, his small hand touching hers. Dorothy forced a smile, though tears threatened to spill. "I'm fine, sweetheart, just a little tired." As she tucked them into bed that night, she made a silent vow. She would not let Jacob's betrayal define their future. Little did she know, her resolve was about to be tested in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The evening air was thick with humidity as Dorothy stepped out of the hospital after her shift, exhaustion weighing heavily on her shoulders. The dim glow of the streetlights illuminated the nearly empty parking lot as she adjusted her coat against the chilly breeze. She clutched her worn-out handbag, her mind already racing with worries about the boys at home. Brendan had a fever, and Evan, though only 12, had insisted he could handle looking after his younger brother until she returned. "Dorothy Bootman?" The voice, deep yet tentative, startled her. She turned, her breath catching as her eyes landed on a tall figure stepping out of the shadows. He looked familiar, too familiar. Adam Johnson. The quiet, bookish boy she'd known in high school now stood before her, his sharp suit and polished demeanor a stark contrast to the lanky teenager she remembered. "Adam," she said, disbelief etched into her voice. He smiled, the corners of his lips lifting in a way that softened the tension in his otherwise sharp features. "It's been a while," he said, his tone warm yet tinged with hesitation. "I wasn't sure it was you at first." Dorothy forced a smile, her pulse quickening. "Yeah, it's been years. What brings you here?" "I'm visiting a friend at the hospital," he said, gesturing toward the building. "But enough about that. How are you?" She hesitated, unsure how much of her current reality she wanted to reveal. "I'm managing," she replied curtly, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. But Adam's gaze lingered, his brows furrowing slightly as he took in her weary expression and the frayed edges of her coat. "You look tired," he said gently. "Is everything okay?" Dorothy bit her lip, debating whether to brush him off or let the words spill out. Before she could decide, Adam added, "You know, I still owe you for all the times you helped me in high school. If there's anything I can do." "Adam, really, I'm fine," she interrupted, her voice firmer than she intended. The last thing she needed was pity, even from an old friend. He nodded, but the concern in his eyes didn't waver. "All right," he said slowly. "But if you ever need anything, here's my card." He pulled a sleek business card from his pocket and extended it toward her. Dorothy hesitated, then took it. Thanks, she muttered, slipping it into her bag. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her heart pounding. She couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was more than a coincidence, and as much as she tried to focus on getting home to her boys, Adam's reappearance lingered in her mind like a faint, persistent echo. Friday arrived, marking the dreaded due date for the rent. Dorothy, however, found herself without the means to pay, and she and her boys were forced out of their home. Standing on the cold pavement with nowhere to turn, Dorothy's thoughts drifted to the business card Adam had once given her. With a trembling hand, she dialed his number and shared her desperate situation. Adam listened intently and without hesitation, extended an invitation. Come stay at my house. The guest room Adam offered was small but immaculate, with soft linen on the bed and a faint lavender scent drifting in the air. Dorothy stood in the doorway, her boys clutching at her sides. Brendan's wide eyes scanned the room, while Evan tugged at her sleeve. Mom, is this really ours for tonight? Evan asked, his voice filled with a mix of wonder and uncertainty. For as long as you need, Adam interjected gently from behind them, his hands stuffed into his pockets. It's not much, but I hope it gives you a little peace. Dorothy turned to face him, her gratitude evident in her tired smile. Adam, I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to, he replied, just let me help. As the boys explored the room, testing the bounciness of the bed and peeking into the closet, Dorothy sat on the edge of a chair, her exhaustion catching up with her. Adam handed her a cup of tea and took a seat across from her. Do you remember how you used to draw during lunch breaks in high school? Adam asked, his tone lighter now. You'd fill entire notebooks with sketches. Dorothy laughed softly. That feels like a lifetime ago. Life got complicated. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. You're still that person, Dorothy. Maybe it's time to bring some of that back. The thought lingered as the evening wore on. After tucking the boys into their new beds and ensuring they were warm, Dorothy stood by the window, gazing at the unfamiliar yet welcoming surroundings. For the first time in months, the gnawing weight of despair loosened its grip. Perhaps this was the fresh start they so desperately needed. The knock at the door came just as Dorothy was settling Evan and Brendan into their evening routine. The sound was sharp, urgent, and it echoed through Adam's spacious home, now their temporary refuge. Dorothy froze mid-step, the color draining from her face. She exchanged a glance with Adam, who stood by the kitchen counter, his brows furrowing with concern. Expecting someone? Adam asked quietly, setting his coffee mug aside. No, Dorothy whispered, her throat tightening, her heart hammered as a familiar unease crept in. Adam walked to the door, his movements cautious yet deliberate. Dorothy stood rooted, holding her breath as Adam opened it. A man's silhouette filled the doorway, a tall, broad figure in a tailored suit. It was Jacob. Jacob, how did you find me? And why are you here? Dorothy asked in fright. Dorothy, Jacob said, his voice smooth but cold, like ice cracking under pressure. We need to talk. Dorothy's chest constricted as Brendan peeked out from behind her. Mom? Who's that? He asked innocently. Adam stepped forward, his frame subtly blocking the doorway. I think you've done enough talking, Jacob, Adam said, his tone firm but controlled. She doesn't need this right now. Jacob's expression twisted into a smirk. This doesn't concern you, he snapped. I'm here for my sons. Dorothy found her voice, though it trembled. Your sons, she said, stepping forward. You walked out on us. You left us with nothing, Jacob. Don't you dare pretend to care now. Jacob's smirk faltered, but his arrogance remained. I came to offer a settlement, he said, holding out an envelope. For the boys. Dorothy eyed the envelope, her stomach churning. You think money fixes everything? She asked, her voice growing steadier. They needed a father. Jacob scoffed. Take it or leave it. But don't blame me for your failures. Before Dorothy could respond, Adam stepped closer. You heard her, he said, his voice low and steady. Leave. Now. Jacob's eyes narrowed, but he turned on his heel and walked away. The door closed with a heavy thud, and Dorothy exhaled shakily. Adam placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You don't have to face him alone, he said softly. Dorothy nodded, pulling Brendan close as Evan joined her. We're stronger together, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The evening air was thick with the scent of fresh rain as Dorothy stood on Adam's porch, watching her boys laugh together in the yard. It had been months since they'd first arrived, months of healing, growing, and slowly piecing their lives back together. But tonight, something stirred in her chest, a quiet voice urging her to take a leap she'd long been too afraid to consider. "Dorothy?" Adam's voice broke her thoughts as he stepped outside, a soft smile on his face. "You've been awfully quiet. What's on your mind?" She hesitated, wringing her hands together. I've been thinking about the future. About the boys, about us." Her voice faltered, but Adam's steady gaze encouraged her to continue. "You've done so much for us, Adam. I don't even know how to begin repaying you." Adam stepped closer, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "Dorothy, this isn't about repayment. You and the boys, you've given me something I never thought I'd have, a family." Her breath caught, tears pricking her eyes. "A family? Do you really mean that?" He nodded, his voice filled with warmth. "I've watched you rebuild yourself, piece by piece. You're stronger than you know, Dorothy. And I want to be by your side, for all of it." For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The boys' laughter echoed in the background as Dorothy's heart pounded in her chest. She had spent so long fearing betrayal, so long guarding her heart. But here with Adam, it felt safe. It felt right. "Adam," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "I want that too. For me, for Evan and Brendan. I want us to be a family." A smile broke across his face, and without hesitation, he pulled her into a warm embrace. The boys, noticing the scene, ran up to join them, wrapping their arms around Dorothy and Adam in a joyful group hug. Over time, Dorothy and Adam's bond deepened, built on trust, kindness, and shared moments of understanding. Adam became more than just a helping hand. He grew into a father figure for Evan and Brendan, offering them the love and guidance they had longed for. As their connection blossomed, Dorothy and Adam eventually married, solidifying their commitment to one another. Adam lovingly adopted the boys, transforming their once fragile lives into a warm and stable family filled with joy, laughter, and unconditional love.
Friends, what do you think of this story? Write your opinion in the comments. Would you like more stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button so you don't miss any videos. See you tomorrow.